I'm 19, so the world, like these are the first few years that I've been really able mentally to process politics in the world and the situation of what is happening, the global order, the politicians in different countries, and it's going quite a bit haywire. I might say, at least from what I've seen, maybe because I'm so new to it that it's quite a bit of a shock. What I've seen so far is quite like, let's say, last 6 years, it's been a rise of nationalism in the world, with Brexit, with rise of Trump. Where do you see this trend going over the next few years, after COVID, after Trump lost, and Brexit fiasco?
Absolutely. So, well, firstly, I hope you don't suggest you're not suggesting that I'm significantly over 19. Obviously, I'm looking at this world with very fresh eyes in many ways. But I think, responding to your question, uh, so this is both expected and unexpected. So I think what is expected and perhaps um, so the resurgence of nationalism was very much for me expected. I think we in 20 sort of I guess the early 20th, the first decade of the 20th century, we have been all misled by the kind of debate about whether Fukuyama was right that history has ended, and whether we are entering that sort of final stage of global capitalism and liberalism, and the questions that we were posing in 2010 were mostly questions like, when will China become a liberal democracy? Or, is there going to be some kind of a replacement to the UN in terms of a more democratic global order? I think debates about cosmopolitanism became extremely on trend. So we talked about people wanting to be citizens of the world as opposed to citizens of the nation, and so on. And I remember back then, so this was more or less when I started my PhD. I was very um, skeptical of that trend because firstly, it was simply not true on the ground. It was not true on the ground for two reasons. Firstly, because there were people who still held very close and um, and sort of limited group identities. It was simply the case that they were being, in many ways, marginalized or did not participate in that sort of mainstream democratic discourse. Um, and I think, secondly, what we did see was that I guess this vision of a world citizen of the cosmopolite was very much contrasted with the refugee, right? And because cosmopolitans were people who had that possibility, that right, that freedom to transcend national borders. Refugees were those who were escaping, national borders,
But still culturally limited to their.
but culturally very much sort of um, uh, still within their kind of own kind of local communities, and kind of attempts to recreate those local communities elsewhere. And this is not to say that one or the other culturally is superior or makes more sense, but the point is that cosmopolitanism, as we understood it in the first decade of in fact probably the first 2 decades of the 20th century, has been 21st century, has been very much something for the wealthy, something for the perceived mostly urban elite, right? And this is not to say, again, that there's nothing valuable in these experiences, because there's a lot of value, and a lot of liberalism actually comes from the fact that people so liberalism came from that um, I guess the prosperity that came with cities, and the fact that there was a rise of the middle class and the people who were actually traveling and therefore seeing that actually others can cooperate with them with trade and on trade and so on. I think in that sense the kind of cosmopolitanism that we have seen in the early part of the so far in the 21st century was referencing those traditions, but at the same time was very exclusive. And what you have found with the financial crisis is that it has created a wider gap between those who have succeeded in the kind of global race for capital, and those who have not succeeded and who are excluded. And that has obviously created the Trumps, the Brexits, and so on in the world. Now, the fact that we are post Brexit and post Trump. Well, we don't know if we're really post Trump, but the fact that we are now in Biden years, does that change many things? I said that there's one element that I did not predict, what I did not expect in 2010, and that was the resurgence of the state, right? And I think actually more important than the rise of nationalism, because nationalism rises, it's a cycle in many ways, and it has to, and the nationalism rising tends to have to do with a political system that so it does not work for everyone. Nationalism usually is a response to a need for some kind of redefinition of a public good or some kind of common cause that that people can get behind, and and therefore justify or legitimize a democratic system. But I think that the more problematic trend is the fact that we're seeing a rampant growth of the state, and the combination of the two. So the combination of nationalism and an increase in the scope and strength of the state is going to potentially be the explosive combination that will, well, that might lead to conflict. So if I think about the potential of conflict, this is probably not driven by nationalism, it's driven by statism.